Hi, I'm Rod Lee, author of Danny Deer, a memoir. You might have thought I was a fraud if I didn't bring books, and I don't have books right now. I'm waiting for them, but that's why I brought this loose-bound edition that I have to prove it's real. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, but my subject that I really wanted to talk about more was the writing life and how I've pursued that over the years. But Danny Deer is kind of a homage to my son. He died at the age of 49 in February of 2023. And we had kind of this extraordinary father-son relationship. He battled alcohol and addiction for many years. And I was kind of like side by side with him through much of this, thick and thin. So we had our moments up and down, good and bad, tears and joy, all the whole story through his life. So he was a fighter. He tried to overcome all of his addictions. He just wasn't successful in the end. So I am going to read part of one chapter. It's chapter 6, just to give you an idea. It's called The Slingshot. It kind of illustrates my concern for him when he was a young boy, which continued throughout his life. And it harkens back to where I grew up in Endicott, New York. And so it's not real long. I'll just read this. I saw some of myself in Danny watching him from the front porch of the house in West Corners in the same small pocket of innocence I had known as a boy. He was riding his big wheels, pumping the pedals hard, his 3-year-old eyes dancing with glee as he executed sharp turns with squeals of delight. I will tell him about Larry and Rick one day, I thought, how my friends and I from Day Hollow Road avoided this part of the neighborhood in grade school. This was Larry and Rick's turf. We knew enough to stay clear of it, which is why Huey and I took the shortcut past the Topper Bar and over a narrow section of creek and up the hill to Mrs. Robbins's class. We had heard the stories. We understood what Larry and Rick could do with their fists, often without any provocation other than a desire to show weaker kids that they were boss. I remembered West Corners as conducive to happiness, except for bullies like Larry and Rick and Tonky. It was where I had become a Cub Scout, and my mom was our troop's den mother, and we attended meetings on the second floor of the fire station, where I was first bitten by the sports bug, and where I spent virtually all of my waking hours with a bat and ball and glove on the fields behind the school, which had become my second home, where a band of brothers played cowboys and Indians on the hill behind Chucky's house and built a clubhouse out of discarded boards, where my imagination soared with the discovery of the Hardy Boys and Huckleberry Finn and Jim Hawkins and Jack and the Beanstalk, and where I listened to the fairy tales that my mother read to me, which instilled in me a lifelong love of reading. I wished for Danny nothing less than the childhood I had enjoyed. Not too far, buddy, I said. Okay, Dad, he shouted back. I don't want anything bad to happen to my boy, I thought. And I'd go on to describe the slingshot. This won't take much longer. The contraption known as the slingshot posed an irresistible tug on him. It was his first real encounter with danger, but it was not something that gave Danny or myself particular pause. I had spent my share of time on one in West Endicott Park, just as I had swimming in the small pool, riding the carousel, buying sugar daddies and Butterfingers and Tootsie Pops at the corner in the shed from which management operated, enjoying the big slide and teeter-totter and eating lunch at the picnic tables under the long roof that covered them. In our adolescence, my crowd practically ran West Endicott Park. It was located just a few blocks from my paternal grandparents' E.J. home on Jennings Street, which afforded me easy access. So I was a regular. I would stash my Schwinn on the bicycle stand near the entrance to the park and walk in as if I owned the place. At 11, 12, and 13 years old, my friends and I would commandeer the slingshot and twirl it round and round while reminding the small fry to, quote, hang on. I did not think of it as hazardous, but then there wasn't much that scared me back then, unlike now. It was just fun to climb aboard and feel the exhilaration, or to get it whirling faster and faster for the younger kids and to hear them exclaim their approval. We older boys chose to stand, even though the rules of the park specified that everyone sit. We had gotten that sure of ourselves. How threatening could a ride on a spinning attraction attached to the ground at a tilt be? I can still see the worn path that surrounded the slingshot at West Endicott Park from the constant stamp of our feet as we pushed it along. And so he fell off the slingshot on a family outing out in the country and hit his head and had a deep cut in his head and had to have like 14 stitches. So that's the upshot of what that chapter is all about. That's from chapter 6. I've had a long time quest to become a writer and a published author. And one of the first words of advice I ever got was write what you know. So I've written a number of books, and I've always tried to adhere to that principle. And 20 years ago today, or this year, I published the first book that kind of had any kind of an impact at all. It was called Shoetown. It was about the place where I grew up, which was the home of Endicott Johnson Shoes. It did very well, sold coast to coast. A lot of people who either worked in the factory or were relatives, descendants of people who had, including my own grandparents. I also wrote a book called Blanche of Appalachian about my grandmother. I wrote a book called Nance's Nook, which was based on my time working in a convenience store and kind of like a little comedy of a book about all the interesting people that came in, told me their life stories and all these things I encountered in the store. My most recent book before this one was Gil Christopher, which is a book about aging and growing old, and that's done pretty well too. So in my long quest to become a better writer, a more creative writer, I kept looking for inspiration from people who inspired me, and there have been a number. Hemingway, probably first and foremost. My favorite Hemingway book is The Old Man and the Sea. I keep telling people to read it. It's very short, very powerful. Story about Santiago the fisherman. Just a remarkable story. So I recommend it to everybody. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, of course, is his most famous book. I'm very, very big fan of that book. Eudora Welty out of Mississippi. She's less known than Faulkner, but a very good writer. She's deceased now. She wrote a lot from her personal experience. Gertrude Stein, who was in that camp with Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all those people that were expatriates in Paris. Faulkner, of course, although he's kind of hard to understand sometimes. Henry James, who was known as the master. Mark Twain, of course, Dickens. Edna Ferber, who you may not know, and I didn't know her until we watched a movie one night called So Big, and we were just engrossed in the movie. And the movie is about her and her son living on a farm, and he was a small boy, and he kept asking his mother, how big am I? And she kept saying, so big. So that's the name of the book. So I had to have the book. I got it at my friend Deb's bookstore in Webster. It's called So Big. It's actually out of print now, except you can get very minimal copies of it with just a bare bones copy if you order it from Amazon or something like that. I'll mention Stephen King, even though I'm not a big Stephen King fan. I've read 3 Stephen King books. The first one was Carrie, which is a very disturbing book. It was his first really successful book. The second one was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which was actually kind of like a throwaway book. I think he would even admit it. It wasn't that great of a book. It was about this girl who loved a Red Sox pitcher named Tom Gordon, and she got lost in the woods, and it's kind of that kind of a story. Then there's Pet Sematary, and I didn't sleep for a week. That was a great book. The best book Stephen King ever wrote, in my estimation, is called On Writing. And I've read a number of books about writing and suggestions and advice on how to become a better writer. This is by far the best. If you have any aspirations to write, I would recommend that you get it. And I'm just going to read a little bit from it, how he first started. This book is from 2000, yeah, 2000. So he talks about his first story idea. My first really original, and some of you will appreciate the reference point here. My first really original story idea, you always know the first one, I think, came near the end of Ike's 8-year reign of benignity as president. I was sitting at the kitchen table of our house in Durham, Maine, and watching my mother stick sheets of S&H green stamps into a book. A lot of people will remember green stamps. My mother collected them. Our little family troca had moved back to Maine so our mom could take care of her parents in their declining years. Then he goes into this, how the book evolves. On the day this particular idea, the first really good one, came sailing at me, my mother remarked that she needed 6 more books of stamps to get a lamp she wanted to give her sister Molly for Christmas, and she didn't think she would make it in time. I guess it will have to be for her birthday instead, she said. They cuss these things always look like a lot until you stick them in a book. Then she crossed her eyes and ran her tongue out at me. When she did, I saw her tongue was S&H green. I thought how nice it would be if you could make those damn stamps in your basement. And in that instant, a story called Happy Stamps was born. The concept of counterfeiting green stamps and the sight of my mother's green tongue created it in an instant. I mean, the guy has a great imagination. I think everybody would agree on that. The hero of my story was your classic poor schmuck, a guy named Roger who had done jail time twice for counterfeiting money. One more bust would make him a 3-time loser. Instead of money, he began to counterfeit happy stamps. Except, he discovered, the design of happy stamps was so moronically simple that he wasn't really counterfeiting at all. He was creating reams of the actual article. In a funny scene, probably the first really competent scene I ever wrote, Roger sits in the living room with his old mom, the two of them mooning over the Happy Stamps catalog while the printing press runs downstairs, ejecting bale after bale of those same trading stamps. Great Scott, Mom says. According to the fine print, you can get anything with Happy Stamps, Roger. You tell them what you want, and they figure out how many books you need to get it. Why, for 6 or 7 million books, we could probably get a Happy Stamps house in the suburbs. Roger discovers, however, that although the stamps are perfect, the glue is defective. If you lap the stamps and stick them in the book, they're fine. But if you send them through a mechanical liquor, the pink Happy Stamps turn blue. Actually, I think that's a mistake in the book. I think he meant to say if you lick the stamps. He says if you lap the stamps. Anyway, at the end of the story, Roger is in the basement, standing in front of a mirror. Behind him on the table are roughly 90 books of Happy Stamps, each book filled with individually licked sheets of stamps. Our hero's lips are pink. He runs out his tongue. That's even pinker. Even his teeth are turning pink. Mom calls cheerily down the stairs, saying she has just gotten off the phone with the Happy Stamps National Redemption Center in Terre Haute, and the lady said they could probably get a nice Tudor home in Weston for only 11,600,000 books of Happy Stamps. Self-publishing. Even Stephen King has self-published. Even major authors self-publish from time to time. They don't always go with, Doubleday or some of these big outfits. If they're in a hurry to get a book published, if they want to do it cheap, run off X number of copies, they self-publish. And there's any number of ways you can do that, including through Amazon, which is real cheap. So anybody who has any interest in self-publishing, if they want to talk to me, they're free to get in touch with me. I've had a lot of experience with that. My current book, Danny Deer, is being published by a friend of mine out in Burlington. I should have copies this weekend. I actually got an email recently from Ray Mariano, who's the former mayor of Worcester. He's a subscriber to my publication, The Rambler. And he said he had just finished a novel, and he wondered how he could get it self-published. And I told him the same thing I tell a lot of people. Self-publishing is tricky business. You have to kind of have an idea of what you want to see happen and stick to your guns on holding the line, because a lot of these self-publishing companies, and I've used a number of them, Writers Branding, Author House, they're Dorrance, they're constantly sending me emails. Once they know you've published, they want to get you hooked on your next book. But the problem is they want a big upfront cost, like $10,000. And what they're promising by way of marketing and promotion and all that never seems to materialize the way they say it will. So there's a lot of disappointment involved there. So with Vera, my friend, what he's doing for me is basically just printing my book, because he runs a printing business, also a marketing and design business. So he's doing that. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And the only other thing I'm going to mention is I'm always getting ideas for new books. So recently in the Blackstone Valley Tribune, which I get at home, free newspaper, I used to be the editor there. So they've had these people writing letters. And it started with this woman from Uxbridge, very opinionated and very argumentative. It's basically the poison pen scenario. So I said to my wife the other day, this would make a great book, especially if it could be about letter writing that is vicious. Vicious, I mean, it's no holds barred. If you read any of these, you'd know what I'm talking about. But then if it escalated into something more, and I can kind of envision it like a Stephen King would, where it doesn't just involve letters, but maybe like sabotage or all kinds of different things happening between these different people who don't really know each other except what they write to each other or write about each week. And keeping in the back of my mind that this might make a really good novel. So that's my next idea. Any questions about Danny Deer, I'm happy to answer. It's 25 chapters, kind of like the story of his life and mine. And, you know, I go through different scenarios of his life on the streets. He was homeless for a long period of time, in and out of different sober houses, courthouses. He did some jail time, but he was a really good person. He was very family oriented. He had 3 daughters who he loved very much. No, I just thought it would be a good way to put in perspective what our bond was like as father and son. And the other thought was, and because that's usually the way I approach anything I write, and I thought it was therapeutic. That was kind of my way of handling the grief. Not to say that I haven't had to deal with it in other ways too. I can read a little bit from the introduction. This book will not appeal to everyone because obviously it's about death and tragedy. He died peacefully. He didn't die the way I thought he might in so many different dreams I had, nightmares. His body gave out. He had so many physical issues going on. But it won't be for everyone, that kind of a book. But I think it will appeal to people who are dealing with that, with death in the family, with addiction, alcoholism. It wasn't a suicide, so there's that. So from the introduction, this is not long either. The arrival of September and Labor Day weekend in New England brings with it an alcohol and drug-free festival known as Sober in the Sun, SITS for short. You guys may be familiar with it. It's held in at the Treasure Valley Campground. Held on the grounds of the Treasure Valley Scout Reservation in the rustic suburban community of Rutland, Massachusetts. The event has special meaning for me in that it was founded more than 30 years ago by my friend Joe Catroni Jr. of Worcester and several others. Danny loved Sober in the Sun for the same reason, and in equal if not greater measure, because it spoke to his continuous and unfortunately oft unsuccessful attempts to shed a dependence on substances that were harmful to him. On the Saturday afternoon of the 2024 edition of Sober in the Sun, under partly cloudy skies and with a touch of humidity in the air, my attention turned to a small platform next to the main stage. There, a long-haired, boyish-looking figure with a baseball cap turned backwards was performing as a warm-up act for the North County Band out of Redding, Connecticut. Just a kid, I thought. I discovered in speaking to him when he had finished his set that Matty Garashko was indeed only 18, and that, as he had mentioned in introducing himself, he was moving to Las Vegas in January to pursue a career in entertainment. I love that last song you played, I told him. He beamed and said thank you. The lyrics to the faith-based piece, which Matty delivered in a soft tenor voice and with appropriate sensitivity, reminded me of Danny's own strong belief in Jesus Christ and the Word of God. With chills of astonishment at the powerful message being conveyed, I wrote down these lines on my notepad. Be silent, my son, and soon you will see the greatest of gifts is to get to know me. Nothing I heard that day would surpass in magnitude the effect the young troubadour's composition, the title of which I neglected to obtain, had on me. At another point in the proceedings, I stopped by a vendor booth at which walking sticks were being handed out in exchange for, quote, 2 minutes of your time. There I learned that the wordless walking stick was crafted from broom handles by an organization, the Fellowship of Christian Farmers International, and provided to recipients free of charge as a way to build, maintain, and strengthen faith in God for the farmer, the farmer's family, and the farming industry. We are a motorcycle ministry affiliated with a church in Danielson, Connecticut. Scott Heap, one of the hosts, said. Mr. Heap then asked if I would like a set of colored beads, and I accepted these. The gold is for heaven, he said. The black is for sin and separation. The red is for the blood that Christ shed for us. The white is for forgiveness and purity. And the green is for growing in Christ. He wanted to know if he and his friends could pray for me, and was there anything on my mind that they could beseech the Lord to address? Well, yes, I said. We lost our son in February of 2023. He was 49 years old. His name is Danny. We miss him. It's been difficult. Thus came a clasping of hands and the 2 minutes that had been alluded to by signage as I approached the place in the field where Scott Heap and his colleagues were set up. I mention these moments not to strike an overly religious tone in the text of Danny Deer that follows, knowing that such a tact, taken to the extreme, would turn some readers off. There is, however, no avoiding the role that faith played in Danny's life. This will be more than apparent to the reader, then. My only objective in using my experience at Sober in the Sun as a starting point is to assert that many, many such moments have presented themselves to me over the past 19 months as reminders of who Danny was and what he meant to me. Ours was a father-son relationship for the ages. That's the introduction. And thanks for having me, Jess. Thank you. Thank you.